People think disinheritance is a loud, screaming fight. But in my family, it happened over a chilled salad fork and a silence so heavy it bruised. My father didn't just cut me from a $50 million fortune. He tried to erase my name to protect his own lie. He thought stripping me of the money would leave me powerless. But he forgot the most dangerous thing about a daughter with nothing left to lose. She stops being afraid of the truth. The driveway leading to my father's estate in Ridgehaven always felt less like a return home and more like an approach to a fortress. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of my sedan, a rhythmic warning that I was crossing a boundary line. It was late October, and the Connecticut trees were stripping themselves bare, casting skeletal shadows against the high walls of the property. My father, Graham Simmons, did not believe in cozy architecture. He believed in glass, steel, and sightlines. The house rose out of the manicured lawn like a jagged piece of modern art, transparent enough to show you the wealth inside, but hardened enough to keep you out. I was 33 years old, yet my stomach churned with the same acidic anxiety I had felt at 13. This was supposed to be a reconciliation. For 6 months, our contact had been limited to curt emails and the occasional assistant-brokered phone call. I had been busy at Northline Advisory, managing healthcare implementation strategies, trying to carve out an identity that didn't require the Simmons surname to open doors. But when the invitation came for a family strategy dinner, curiosity and a deeply buried, foolish hope had drawn me back. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, but sharp. I had learned early on that you never showed Graham Simmons a weakness. You armored yourself in tailored wool and stillness. The front door opened before I could knock. It was the house manager, a man who had worked for us since I was in high school, his face composed into a professional mask that betrayed nothing. "Good evening, Ms. Simmons," he said. "They are gathering in the solarium." "Thank you, Arthur," I replied. The house smelled of expensive cedar and lemon polish. It was a cold scent, sterile and imposing. As I walked down the long hallway, my heels clicking on the imported marble, I noticed the art had changed again. The warmth of the Impressionists my mother used to love was gone, replaced by severe, abstract pieces that looked like violent slashes of black paint on canvas. It was a statement. Everything here was a statement. I entered the solarium, a vast room where the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass. The night pressed in against the windows, but inside, the lighting was warm and calculated. My father stood near the wet bar, holding a tumbler of scotch. He looked timeless, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his posture commanding the space around him as if gravity answered to his payroll. Next to him was my mother, Eleanor. She wore a dress the color of champagne and a smile that looked like it had been pinned in place. She held a glass of white wine with both hands, her knuckles white, and sitting on one of the leather armchairs was my younger brother, Caleb, at 29. Caleb still had the softness of a boy who had never been told no without a check attached to the refusal. He looked up as I entered, his eyes darting to our father before he offered me a nod. "Anna," my father said. His voice was a rich baritone, the kind that made boardrooms go silent. "You made good time." "Traffic was light," I said, moving to kiss my mother's cheek. Her skin was cold. She squeezed my hand for a fraction of a second, a secret Morse code she had used my whole life. "Be careful." "We are just waiting for the others," my father said, gesturing to the bartender to pour me a drink. "Others?" I asked, taking the sparkling water offered to me. "I thought this was a family dinner." "We are family here," Graham said smoothly, "but business is the blood that keeps this family alive. You know that." As if on cue, the heavy oak doors opened, and 3 men walked in. I recognized 2 of them immediately: Peter Vane, the chief financial officer of Simmons Ridge Capital, and Thomas Reed, a sleek, smiling man who handled the family's external PR crises. The 3rd man was a stranger, clutching a leather notary bag. My internal alarm began to ring, low and steady. This wasn't a dinner. It was a closing. We moved to the dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a mahogany table that could seat 20. We sat at one end, clustered together in a parody of intimacy. The conversation during the first course was stilted. Peter Vane asked about my work at Northline, his questions probing but polite. He wanted to know about my client list, my hours, my stress levels. I gave him the corporate answers, the polished non-descriptions that sounded impressive but revealed nothing. My father ate with precision, cutting his steak into perfect geometric squares. He waited until the plates were cleared before he dabbed his mouth with a linen napkin and placed it on the table. The room went silent. "I have been doing some thinking," Graham announced. He didn't look at me. He looked at the centerpiece of white orchids. "About the future. The complexity of our holdings has become a burden. It is time to simplify the estate plan." Caleb straightened in his chair, looking like a student waiting for a grade. "We are consolidating the trusts and the managing authority of the holding company," Graham continued. "It requires a singular vision, a steward who understands the necessity of continuity." He turned his gaze to Caleb. "I have decided that Caleb will step into the role of future steward for the family interests. He will be named the primary trustee of the voting shares for Simmons Ridge Capital, effective next month." The air left the room. It wasn't just a slight. It was an erasure. Caleb had never read a balance sheet he didn't find boring. He had spent his 20s drifting between failed startups funded by the bank of Dad. I had an MBA. I had spent 5 years working inside the company before leaving to prove my own merit. I was the one who understood the tax structures, the regulatory environments, the legitimate business. But I wasn't the son. I stayed silent, my face impassive. I knew better than to react. "Congratulations." "Caleb," I said. My voice was steady. "That is a significant responsibility." Graham's eyes flicked to me, disappointed by my lack of outburst. He wanted the fight. He wanted to win it. "It is," Graham said, "and it requires support. You, Anna, have always been independent. You have your own career. You have never quite understood the sacrifice required to keep this ship afloat. You prefer to stand on the shore and critique the captain. I understand the business. Dad," I said, "I just chose to work in a sector where I could build something of my own." "Exactly," he said, pouncing on the word. "Your own. This family is a collective unit, and tonight we are going to formalize that unity." He gestured to the man with the notary bag. The stranger stepped forward, placing a thick stack of documents in front of me. "We are amending the shareholder agreements to reflect the new stewardship," Graham said, his tone casual, as if asking me to pass the salt. "Since you will remain a beneficiary of the passive income trusts, we need your signature on the updated waivers and a standard non-disclosure addendum for the holding company. Just housekeeping." I looked down at the papers. The text was dense, single-spaced. The title at the top read, "Simmons Ridge Capital, Omnibus Amendment and Confidentiality Covenant." I picked up the pen, but I didn't uncap it. I flipped the page. "Just sign at the tabs." "Anna," Peter Vane said gently from across the table, "we have walked Caleb through it already. It is standard language." I flipped another page. My eyes scanned the definitions section. I saw names of entities I didn't recognize. SRC Holdings 7, Blue Pine Management LLC, the Archer Trust. "I don't recognize these entities," I said, pointing to the paragraph. "When were these formed?" "They are subsidiaries," Graham said, a jagged edge entering his voice. "For tax efficiency, it is not something you need to worry about." I read the next clause. It was a waiver of the right to audit. By signing, I would be agreeing to never request a forensic accounting of the holding company or its downstream affiliates. "And this non-disclosure," I said, looking up. "It is retroactive? It covers all historical transactions? It covers the family business?" Graham snapped. "It protects us from outsiders." I looked at the notary. He was sweating, his eyes fixed on the grandfather clock in the corner. It was 8:30 at night. Why was this happening now? Why the rush? If this was just estate planning, we could have done it at the law firm offices next week. "I cannot sign this tonight," I said. I placed the pen down on the linen tablecloth. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother made a small, whimpering sound in her throat. "Excuse me?" my father said. His voice dropped an octave. "I said I cannot sign this tonight," I repeated, keeping my voice level despite the thumping of my heart against my ribs. "There are entities here I don't know. There is a waiver of audit rights that seems unusual for a passive beneficiary role. I need to take this home and review it." "You don't trust me?" Graham asked. "It is not about trust, Dad. It is about diligence. You taught me that. Don't quote my own lessons back to me," he shouted. The sudden volume made the crystal glasses vibrate. He stood up, placing his hands on the table. "You are looking for a payout. You are looking for leverage. That is what this is. You are jealous because I picked your brother. This has nothing to do with Caleb," I said, remaining seated. "I am asking to read a legal document before I bind myself to it forever. Why does that frighten you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Graham's face turned a mottled shade of red. He looked at Peter Vane, then at Thomas Reed. They were watching him, their expressions unreadable. He had an audience, and I had just challenged his absolute authority. "You are ungrateful," he spat. "I gave you everything, the education, the connections, the safety net you take for granted. And when I ask for one moment of loyalty, one moment of unity, you act like a lawyer instead of a daughter." "I am a daughter," I said, standing up now. "But I am not a fool. If the documents are standard, a 24-hour review won't change anything." "Leave," he said. "Graham, please," my mother whispered. "I said leave," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "If you walk out that door without signing, you are choosing to be an outsider, and I will treat you like one." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the rage, but beneath it, I saw something else. I saw terror. He was desperate for that signature. I picked up my purse. "I'm sorry it has to be this way," I said. I turned and walked out. I didn't run. I walked with the same measured pace I had entered with. I heard the glass of his Scotch tumbler shatter against the wall behind me, the sound of 50-year-old single malt splashing against the silk wallpaper. I drove back to my condo in the city in silence. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but my mind was clear. I thought the worst was over. I thought the anger was the punishment. I was wrong. The next morning, the punishment began in earnest. It started at 7 o'clock. I stopped at my usual coffee shop on the way to Northline. When I tapped my platinum card against the reader, the machine beeped a harsh, double-tone error, declined. I frowned. There was a limit of $50,000 on that card. I had used maybe $2,000 this month. "Try it again," I said, smiling apologetically at the barista. Declined. I pulled out my backup card, a generic bank visa. Declined. I felt the heat rising up my neck. I paid with the $20 bill I kept in my phone case and walked out, my heart hammering. I tried to log into my banking app on my phone. The screen swirled, loading, and then went black. A message popped up. "No network connection." I toggled airplane mode. Nothing. My signal bars were grayed out. My phone plan, which was part of a massive corporate family bundle, had been suspended. I got to my office, connected to the Wi-Fi, and the notifications flooded in. But the one that stopped my breath was an email from a generic address, admin@simmonsridgelegal.com. Subject: Notice to vacate. Ms. Simmons. Per the terms of the occupancy agreement for the residential unit located at 404 High Street, the owner, SRC Real Estate 4 LLC, is exercising its right to terminate the tenancy effective immediately. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Access codes will be reset at noon on Friday. I stared at the screen. My condo, the place I had lived for 6 years. I had always known the family trust technically owned it. It was a tax strategy, my father had said. But it was my home. I had painted the walls. I had bought the furniture. It was the one place I felt safe. 72 hours. My phone buzzed on the Wi-Fi. A text from my mother. "Don't make this worse. Please. Anna, he is in a state. Just come back and apologize. Fix it." I looked at the words. "Don't make this worse. Not I love you. Not are you okay?" She wasn't writing as a mother protecting her child. She was writing as a hostage negotiating with a captor. She was terrified that if she showed me any public support, she would be next. I sat at my desk, trying to breathe. I needed to work. I had a client presentation in 2 hours for a hospital network merger. I needed to be professional. There was a knock on my doorframe. It was Marcus, one of the senior partners at Northline. He was a good man, usually jovial, but today he looked uncomfortable. He closed the door behind him. "Anna, do you have a minute?" "Of course," I said, turning my phone face down. He sat on the edge of my desk, avoiding eye contact. "Look, this is awkward. We received an email this morning. An anonymous concern regarding your stability." My blood ran cold. My stability? It was vague. Marcus said quickly. "Allegations about substance abuse, volatile behavior. Normally, I would toss it in the trash. But they copied the compliance officer at the hospital network you are presenting to today. My father. It had to be. He was scorching the earth. He wasn't just cutting me off. He was discrediting me so that if I ever spoke out, I would look like a disgruntled, unstable daughter. Marcus, you know me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I have been here for 3 years. Have I ever missed a deadline? Have I ever shown up impaired?" "No," he admitted, "but the client is spooky. They are asking questions. Maybe it is best if you sit out the presentation today. Take a personal day. Sort out whatever. Domestic issue is bleeding over." He knew. In our circles. Everyone knew everyone. He knew who my father was. He knew the power Graham Simmons yielded. Marcus wasn't punishing me. He was protecting the firm from the blast radius. "I understand," I said stiffly. I packed my bag. I walked out of the office I had worked so hard to earn, feeling the eyes of the paralegals on my back. I couldn't go home. I couldn't go to my parents. I felt exposed, as if my skin had been peeled back. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I drove to the edge of town, to a small credit union where I had opened a savings account when I was 16, using money from a summer job as a camp counselor. It was the only account I had that wasn't touched by the Simmons family office. The branch was quiet. The manager, Mrs. Gable, was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a steel-trap memory. She recognized me immediately. "Anna," she said, coming around the counter. "It has been years, Mrs. Gable. I need your help." I said, "I need to see my full credit report. Right now." She saw the desperation in my face. She didn't ask questions. She led me to a small private office and turned her monitor so we could both see. She typed in my social security number. The report generated a long scroll of data. I scanned the lines. My stomach dropped. There were 5 credit cards I had never seen before. High-limit accounts, all with balances, all marked as authorized user, and there was a hard inquiry from yesterday. Simmons Ridge Capital. Background check. They weren't just cutting me off. They were monitoring me. They had tethered my financial identity to theirs in ways I hadn't realized. That is not mine. I pointed to a card with a $60,000 balance, and that one. "You are listed as a guarantor." "Mrs. Gable said softly, "Anna, if the primary holder defaults on these, the creditors will come for you." I walked out of the bank with a printout of the report folded in my pocket. The sun was shining, bright and mocking. I had no cash. I had no home in 3 days. I had no job security. I needed a lawyer, but not a family lawyer. I needed a shark. I found Mara Klein through a law school friend who whispered her name like a secret. She worked out of a converted brownstone in the city, her office cluttered with stacks of paper and smelling of old coffee. She didn't look like the lawyers my father hired. She wore a cardigan and glasses on a chain. But her eyes were sharp, assessing. I told her everything: the dinner, the documents, the entities, the retaliation. Mara listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back and took off her glasses. "First, the hard truth," she said. Her voice was scratchy. "Lived in. Disinheritance is legal. In America. You have no right to your parents' money. If your father wants to leave it all to a cat sanctuary or your brother, he can. If the condo is in an LLC's name and you don't have a lease, he can evict you. I felt the tears prickling, the exhaustion finally hitting me. So there is nothing I can do? I didn't say that, Mara said. She tapped her pen on the pad. I said disinheritance is legal. But this? The rushed meeting? The notary appearing before you even agreed? The immediate nuclear retaliation? She leaned forward. Wealthy men cut off their daughters all the time. Anna, usually. It is a cold letter from a lawyer. It is slow. This is panic. Panic? I asked. You noticed unfamiliar entity names, she said. SRC Holdings 7. You refused to sign a retroactive waiver. And 12 hours later, they are trying to destroy your credibility and your ability to function. That is not the behavior of a man who is confident in his estate plan. That is the behavior of a man who is trying to bury something before the ground freezes. She circled something on her pad. He wanted you to sign away your right to audit. That is the key. He didn't care about the inheritance. He cared about the waiver. What do I do? I asked. Do I sue? No, Mara said firmly. If you sue now, he wins. He has more money, more lawyers, and he will paint you as the greedy daughter throwing a tantrum. The press will eat you alive. Then what? We reconstruct, she said. You are going to go back to that rental, or wherever you end up, and you are going to write down everything, every conversation you remember, every document you signed in the last 10 years, every favor he asked you to do, every time he moved money around. She looked me in the eye. He's trying to make you feel powerless. Anna, he stripped you of the money, but you still have the one thing he is obviously terrified of. What is that? I asked. You were in the room, she said. You are a witness. I left her office as the sun was setting. The city lights were turning on. A grid of indifference. I felt small. I felt hollowed out. I had lost my family, my home, and my standing in the world in less than 24 hours. But as I walked toward my car, a cold resolve settled in my chest. It wasn't hope. It was something harder. My father thought he had thrown me away. He thought that by taking the $50 million off the table, he had taken my power. He was wrong. He hadn't disarmed me. He had just removed the only reason I had to be polite. I pulled out my phone, still on Wi-Fi, and opened a new note. I typed the date. Then I typed the first thing I remembered. The time Dad asked me to deliver a sealed envelope to a senator's aide in DRC and told me not to ask what was inside. I wasn't going to sue him, not yet. I was going to build a map of his secrets, one memory at a time. The pattern mattered more than the insult. I started the engine. I had work to do. The letter Mara Klein drafted was boring. It was a single page of cream-colored stationery, typed in a standard font, devoid of adjectives or emotion. It did not mention betrayal. It did not mention the $50 million or the shattered Scotch glass or the way my mother looked like a hostage in her own dining room. It simply requested the preservation of all electronic and physical records regarding the governance, amendments, and beneficiary schedules of Simmons Ridge Capital and its associated entities, pursuant to potential future inspection. It is not a lawsuit, Mara explained, sliding the paper across her cluttered desk. It is a flag planted in the ground. It tells their general counsel that you know the game. If they destroy anything after receiving this, it becomes spoliation of evidence. It turns a mistake into a crime. I signed it. My hand felt heavy, the pen scratching loud in the quiet office. Sending this felt like declaring war. But Mara corrected me. War is when you attack, she said. This is just locking the doors so they cannot burn the house down while you are outside. We sent it via certified mail. I watched the postal clerk stamp the receipt, a mundane thump-thump sound that felt disproportionately significant. That receipt was the only shield I had left. The next step was survival. I moved to Hawthorne Falls, New York, a town an hour north of the city that felt a decade away in spirit. It was a place of fading industrial brick and river damp, far removed from the manicured hedges of Ridgehaven or the glass towers of Manhattan. I found a short-term rental in a complex that catered to divorced dads and traveling nurses. The carpet was a durable, industrial gray, and the air smelled faintly of someone else's fabric softener. Downsizing was a physical act of violence against my own history. I stood in the center of the living room surrounded by cardboard boxes, deciding what to keep. I sold my designer handbags to an online consignment shop to pad my dwindling savings. I donated the evening gowns I had worn to charity galas where my father had been the keynote speaker. But the hardest part wasn't the stuff. It was the noise in my pocket. I had made the mistake of looking online. A business blog that covered regional wealth news had run a short blurb. Simmons family restructures estate. Daughter out. Son in. The comments section was a sewer of assumptions. Another spoiled heiress throwing a tantrum because she has to get a job. One user wrote, "I bet she has never worked a day in her life." Wrote another, "Daddy probably cut off the credit card, and she is crying in her mansion." I sat on the floor of my 600-square-foot apartment, eating instant oatmeal made with tap water, and read a stranger's comment that said, "She looks unstable. Good for the father protecting the legacy." They were rewriting me. My father's PR machine, led by Thomas Reed, was likely feeding these narratives to friendly outlets, or maybe the world just naturally hated a woman who fell from a high place. I felt a hot, prickling shame climb up my throat. It wasn't just the loss of money. It was the loss of the right to be believed. I was being painted as a villain in my own tragedy, and I didn't have the microphone to dispute it. I put the phone away. I needed to focus on the tangible. I unpacked my kettle. I unpacked my laptop. I unpacked the file folders Mara had given me. This was my life now. Small, contained, and terrifyingly quiet. 3 days later, my brother Caleb texted me, "Can we meet? Coffee? Just us." I hesitated. My instinct was to say no, to protect the fragile peace I was trying to build. But he was my brother. We used to hide under the banquet tables at galas and make fun of the donors' toupees. We used to be a team. I agreed to meet him at a roadside diner halfway between Ridgehaven and Hawthorne Falls. It was neutral ground, smelling of bacon grease and stale coffee. When Caleb walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car. But it hung on him awkwardly, as if he were a child playing dress-up. He looked exhausted. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and he kept checking his watch, a nervous tic I hadn't seen since he flunked out of boarding school. He slid into the booth opposite me and didn't hug me. "Hi, Anna," he said. "Hi, Caleb." He ordered a black coffee. I ordered the same. The waitress left, and Caleb folded his hands on the table. It was a deliberate posture, one I had seen our father use 1,000 times. "I wanted to see how you're settling in," he said. "I am fine. I lied. It is quiet." "Good," he said. "That is good." He took a sip of coffee and grimaced. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. He didn't open it. He just set it on the table between us. "Dad is really upset." "Anna," Caleb said. His voice sounded rehearsed, the cadence slightly off. "He feels like this whole thing has spiraled out of control. He wants to fix it." I looked at the envelope. "What is that?" "It is a path back," Caleb said. He looked at the window, avoiding my eyes. "It is a statement. Just a clarification. Really, if you sign it, Dad is willing to reinstate the legacy condo access and discuss a stipend for your transition." I reached for the envelope. Caleb flinched, as if he thought I might hit him. I opened it. It was a single sheet of paper, drafted by the same legal team that had evicted me. I, Anna Simmons, hereby acknowledge that my previous refusal to sign estate documents was a result of temporary emotional distress and a misunderstanding of the complex financial structures involved. I retract any assertions of impropriety and apologize for the disruption caused to the family and Simmons Ridge capital. I read it twice. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession to a crime I hadn't committed. It was designed to be leaked. If I signed this, and then ever tried to speak up about the irregularities I had seen, they would release this letter and say, "See? She admitted she was crazy. She admitted she didn't understand. Did you read this, Caleb?" I asked softly. He nodded, too quickly. It is just standard. Anna, it is just to clear the air. Dad says if you sign this, we can be a family again. We can put this behind us. I looked at my brother. I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't the future steward of the empire. He was its first prisoner. He was terrified of being me. He saw what happened when you said no, and he had decided that saying yes was the price of survival. He wrote this. Didn't he? I asked. Or Thomas Reed did. It doesn't matter who wrote it, Caleb said, his voice rising in frustration. It is a way out. Why do you always have to be so difficult? Why can't you just play the game? Because the game is rigged. Caleb, I said. I slid the paper back across the table. I cannot sign this. It is a lie. Caleb's face crumbled. For a second, the corporate mask slipped, and I saw the little brother who used to ask me to check his closet for monsters. He is going to destroy you. Anna, he whispered. He is not going to stop. I know, I said. I stood up and dropped a $5 bill on the table. Caleb, I said, looking down at him, be careful what you sign. Once you are the steward, his sins become your sins. I left him there, staring at the unsigned lie, and walked out into the gray afternoon. I wasn't shaking with anger anymore. I was shaking with grief. I realized then that I hadn't just lost a father. I had lost a brother to a cult of one. He had been trained to believe that love was a transaction and that compliance was the currency. The warning came 2 nights later. I was sitting on my second-hand sofa, surrounded by spreadsheets I had built from memory, trying to reconstruct the hierarchy of the family holding company. My phone rang. The screen said, unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something in the air felt charged. Hello? Anna? The voice was older, female, breathless. Yes, who is this? Mrs. Halloway, she said. I froze. Mrs. Halloway had been my father's executive assistant for 20 years. She had retired 3 years ago. Quietly, with a generous package and a party no one really enjoyed, she was the woman who knew where the bodies were buried because she had bought the shovels. Mrs. Halloway? Are you okay? I cannot stay on the phone long, she said. Her voice was trembling. I am using a prepaid phone. Anna, listen to me. I heard about what happened. You did? People talk. She said, the drivers talk. The security guards talk. Anna, they are scrubbing the files. What do you mean? I asked, gripping the phone. I have a friend who still works in records. She said, she told me Thomas Reed and the lawyers have been in the sub-basement archive for 2 days. They are shredding the physical copies of the 98 to 04 ledgers, and they are wiping the old servers, the preservation letter. It hadn't stopped them. It had triggered them. Why those years? I asked. That was before everything went digital, she said, before the oversight got tighter. That is where the paper always lived. Mrs. Halloway, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Do you know what they are hiding? She went silent. I could hear her breathing. A ragged sound. I cannot say. She whispered, I signed the NDA. If I talk, they will take my pension. They will take my house. I understand. I said gently. You don't have to say anything specific. Look at the charities. She said, just look at the timing. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the apartment buzzing in my ears. Look at the charities. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the public tax filings for the Simmons Family Foundation. They were public record, available to anyone who knew where to look. I downloaded the Form 990s for the last 10 years. I started cross-referencing. I opened a second window and searched for news archives regarding Simmons Ridge Capital. I built a timeline. November 2018. A massive chemical spill at a Simmons-owned manufacturing plant in Ohio. Bad press. Potential lawsuits. December 2018. The Simmons Family Foundation announces a $2 million donation to a clean water initiative in the same district. Standard PR cleanup. I thought, cynical, but legal. I kept looking. March 2015. A whistleblower lawsuit is filed alleging wage theft at a subsidiary logistics company. April 2015. The lawsuit is settled quietly. April 2015. A $500,000 grant is issued to a cryptic nonprofit called the Heritage Preservation Fund. I Googled the Heritage Preservation Fund. No website, no news coverage, just a mailing address in Delaware. I kept digging. Going back to the years Mrs. Halloway had mentioned, there was a pattern. Every time the company faced a regulatory threat or a legal scandal, money moved out of the foundation, but not always to legitimate charities. Sometimes it went to these gray entities, these generic-sounding funds that absorbed cash and produced no impact reports. I called a friend from business school, David, who now worked in forensic accounting for a large firm in Chicago. I didn't tell him who I was investigating. I just gave him a hypothetical. David, I asked, how do you hide a beneficiary in a layered LLC structure? It is the Russian nesting doll method, he explained. LLC A is owned by LLC B, which is owned by a trust in South Dakota, which is managed by a darker trust in the Caymans. If you want to find the human at the end of the chain, you have to peel back every layer, and usually, the final layer is a ghost. I looked at the entity names from the amendment I had refused to sign. I had memorized them. Silverpine Management LLC. I searched for it in the Maine property registry. It was a long shot, but the name sounded coastal. Bingo. Silverpine Management LLC held the deed to a 3-acre property in Silverpine Harbor, Maine. Purchase price, $3.2 million. Cash. I zoomed in on the satellite map. It wasn't a vacation home. It was a dense, wooded lot with a high-security fence and a large, windowless outbuilding. It looked like storage, or a bunker. Silverpine Harbor. We never vacationed there. We were Martha's Vineyard people. Why did my father own a compound in the middle of nowhere in Maine, purchased through a shell company that I was asked to unknowingly validate? I pinned the location to my digital map. Something else. I typed in my notes. Not leisure. Storage. The next morning, the mail arrived. It wasn't a letter from a friend. It was a thick, rigid envelope from Caldwell Reeve, the family's external litigation firm. I opened it. A cease and desist order. Harassment and unauthorized access to confidential information. Dear Ms. Simmons, it has come to our attention that you have been contacting former employees and engaging in a campaign of harassment against the Simmons family and its associates. Furthermore, your recent records request is viewed as a vexatious attempt to intimidate. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I was the one living in a rented box, eating ramen, and I was the one doing the intimidating? I called Mara. She didn't laugh. This is the standard playbook. She said, they are trying to gaslight you. They want you to think that asking questions is illegal. It is not. You are a beneficiary. You have a right to ask questions. But they are counting on you being scared. I am scared. I admitted. Good, Mara said. That means you are taking it seriously. But don't stop. If they are sending you a cease and desist for making a phone call and looking at public records, it means you are looking in the right direction. I hung up and looked at the cease and desist. I taped it to my wall, right next to the map of Maine. It wasn't a stop sign. It was a trophy. It proved I was getting close. But the war wasn't just legal. It was public. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an email from a reporter at the Bay Ridge Ledger, a local paper that covered the social scene of Connecticut. Subject: comment on your health? Ms. Simmons, my name is Sarah Jenkins. I am working on a story regarding the leadership transition at Simmons Ridge Capital. We have received information from sources close to the family suggesting that your departure from the family business was due to a personal mental health crisis and a need for rehabilitation. We wanted to give you a chance to comment or clarify your current status. My hands shook as I typed a reply. I deleted it. I typed another. Mental health crisis. That was the narrative. It was elegant. Really. It explained everything. My absence, my disinheritance, my silence, without making my father look like a monster. It made him look like a concerned parent dealing with a troubled child. It weaponized the very real stigma of mental health to discredit anything I might say in the future. If I spoke out later about fraud, they would just say, "Oh, that's poor Anna. She's having another episode. I didn't reply to the journalist. I knew better. Anything I said would be twisted. Anna Simmons denies she is crazy is a headline that still implies I might be crazy. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark of my living room. The streetlights from the parking lot cast long, jail bar shadows across the floor. I felt a profound, crushing loneliness. It wasn't just the isolation of the apartment. It was the realization that the history of my life was being rewritten by people who claimed to love me. My father was willing to destroy my reputation, my sanity, and my future just to keep his secrets hidden. I opened a new document on my laptop. I needed to say it, even if no one heard. Dear Dad, I remember when I was 10 and I fell off my bike. You didn't pick me up. You told me to check for broken bones. And if there weren't any, to get back on. You said pain was information. You said crying was a waste of data. I am not crying now. I am looking at the data. I wanted you to be proud of me. I spent 33 years trying to be the son you wanted, the sharpest mind in the room, the one who could handle the weight. But you didn't want a partner. You wanted a complicit shadow. I am writing this because part of me still wants to drive back to Ridgehaven, sign your papers, and beg you to hug me. Part of me wants to be safe more than I want to be right, but I know now that the father I'm trying to please doesn't exist. You are a construct of leverage and fear, and the only thing you respect is force. So I am not going to beg. I am going to become the thing you trained me to be. I am going to win. I stared at the blinking cursor. The tears finally came, hot and silent, tracking down my face. I let myself feel it. The grief of the orphan. Because that's what I was. My parents were alive, but they were gone. I didn't send the letter. I didn't save it. I highlighted the text and hit backspace. I watched the words disappear, one by one, until the screen was white again. I wasn't going to send him a letter. That was what a daughter would do. I was going to send him a mirror. I was going to show him exactly what he had built, and I was going to make him look at it while the world watched. I wiped my face. I turned on the desk lamp. I pulled the timeline of the charities back up, the Heritage Preservation Fund. I needed to know who ran it. I needed to know where the money went. I picked up the phone and dialed Mara. It was late, almost 11. She answered on the second ring. Anna, I found something, I said, and I need a forensic accountant, a real one, not a friend doing a favor. I need someone who can trace a ghost. I know a guy, Mara said, her voice shifting from sleepy to sharp. His name is Devin Price. He is expensive. I don't care. I said, I will sell my car. I will sell everything. We are going to need more than a car, Mara warned. Then I will get more. I said, but Mara? Yeah? Tell him to get ready. We are going to Maine. Devin Price did not look like the kind of man who hunted billionaires. He looked like a community college professor who had lost a fight with a sleepless night. His office was located in a converted warehouse in the garment district, a single room dominated by 3 massive monitors and a whiteboard covered in red ink. The air smelled of stale espresso and ozone. Mara Klein had introduced us only 10 minutes ago, but Devin had already dismantled my entire understanding of how money worked. You are looking for the money, Devin said, turning his chair to face me. He was holding a half-eaten bagel. That is your mistake. You never look for the money. Money is water. It flows where gravity takes it. You look for the pipes. I sat on a metal stool, clutching my notebook. What do you mean? I mean you look for control points, he said. He stood up and tapped the whiteboard. Who has the authority to sign a check over $10,000? Who has the administrative login for the wire transfer portal? Who benefits when a vendor contract is renewed without a bid? And most importantly, who starts sweating when you ask a boring question? He pulled up a spreadsheet on the center monitor. It was a visualization of the Simmons Ridge Capital vendor list. Mara told me about the entity names you saw. Devin said, Silver Pine Management, SRC Holdings 7. Those are black boxes. We cannot see inside them yet, but we can see who feeds them. He clicked a few keys. Your family office uses a boutique firm for their back-end administration. Caldwell and Reeve Fiduciary. Ever heard of them? I nodded. I knew the name. They handled the trusts. They sent the birthday checks. They are polished, Devon said. Very discreet. They cater to families who have more money than God and a lot of skeletons. But I did a little digging into their compliance history. He brought up a PDF. It was a court filing from 6 years ago. Heavily redacted. It was a quiet settlement, Devon said. A negligence claim involving a beneficiary in a different family who claimed his trust was being drained by unauthorized administrative fees. Caldwell and Reeves settled for an undisclosed amount before discovery began. He looked at me significantly. That is not proof of anything. Anna, it is just a smell. But in my line of work, if it smells like rot, there is usually a dead body under the floorboards. I looked at the redacted black bars on the document. My father prided himself on working with the best. Why would he use a firm with a history of negligence? Because they are sloppy? I asked. No, Devon said. Because they are flexible. The word hung in the air. Flexible. It was a polite word for corrupt. We need to find the friction, Devon continued. We need to find the transaction that doesn't fit the rhythm. A payment that goes out every month on the 15th, regardless of holidays. A consulting fee that never varies by a cent. That is not business. That is rent, or hush money. I felt a chill go through me. I had grown up thinking my father's business was a fortress of logic. Now, looking at Devon's screen, it looked like a house of cards held together by silence. I want you to go through these foundation records, Devon said, handing me a stack of printouts. Look for the boring stuff, the recurring fees to companies you have never heard of. I took the papers. I had a job to do. 3 days later, my mother called. She didn't text this time. She called from her personal cell, her voice tinny and strained. Anna, she said, I am in the city. I have an hour between appointments. Can you meet me? I hesitated. I was deep in the weeds of the Foundation's 2019 tax filings, but the sound of her voice, so fragile, so desperate, broke my resolve. Where? I asked. Bryant Park, she said. By the carousel? It is public. That was the tell. She wanted to meet somewhere public not for safety, but for witnesses, or perhaps because she was afraid that if we were alone, she would crumble. I took the train into the city. It was a gray Tuesday, the sky threatening rain. I saw her sitting on a green metal chair, wrapped in a cashmere coat that cost more than my entire year's rent at the new apartment. She looked small. Her hands were wrapped around a paper cup of tea, and they were trembling. Mom, I said, sitting opposite her. She looked up, and her eyes filled with tears. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. You look tired. Anna, she said, you look thin. I am fine. Mom, I am surviving. This has to stop, she whispered. She leaned in, her eyes darting around the park as if she expected snipers in the trees. Your father is falling apart. He doesn't sleep. He paces the house at night. Then he should stop attacking me, I said gently. He feels betrayed. Anna, you have to understand. He built this for us, for you, and you threw it in his face because you were confused. I pulled my hand back. Confused? That is what he says, she said quickly. He says you didn't understand the complex nature of the estate tax leverage. He says you got scared by the legal language. I wasn't scared. Mom, I was careful. There is a difference. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue. She dabbed her eyes. But I noticed her hand was shaking even harder now. He wants you to come home, she said. He is willing to forgive the outburst. He is willing to unfreeze the accounts. But you have to meet him halfway. You have to sign the amendment. I sighed. Mom, we have been over this. I cannot sign something I don't understand. It is just a standard indemnity, she blurted out. It is just Clause 14b regarding the retroactive liability shield for the Series C entities. I froze. The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. The carousel music in the background, a bright, cheerful waltz, sounded suddenly grotesque. Clause 14b. My mother was a woman who thought an ETF was a type of foreign car. She had never read a legal contract in her life. She signed where my father pointed. There was no way. Absolutely no way. She knew the specific clause number or the legal term retroactive liability shield unless someone had drilled it into her. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes were wide, pleading. She wasn't just my mother in that moment. She was a deployed asset. "Who told you that number?" I asked. My voice deadly quiet. "What?" She blinked. "Clause 14B. I said, "Who told you to say that? Did Thomas Reed make you memorize it? Or was it Dad?" I just heard them talking," she stammered. Her face flushed a deep, guilty red. "No, Mom, you didn't just hear it. You were briefed." I stood up. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I had come here hoping for a connection, hoping that my mother had broken free of his orbit enough to just see me, but she hadn't. She was wearing a wire, metaphorically speaking. She had been sent here to extract a signature that the lawyers couldn't get. "They think I'm stupid," I said. "They think I am isolated and uninformed. So they sent you to play on my guilt. Anna, please." She stood up, reaching for me. "I am trying to help you. If you don't fix this, he is going to cut you out forever. He is rewriting the will next week. Let him," I said. "But the money," she whispered. "It is not about the money." "Mom!" I almost shouted, causing a woman with a stroller to look over. "It never was. It is about the fact that he owns you. He owns everyone, and I won't let him own me." I walked away. I heard her calling my name, a sharp, panicked sound, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I turned around, I would have gone back to comfort her, and if I went back, I would have lost myself. I took the train back to Hawthorne Falls in a daze. My trust hadn't just fractured, it had pulverized. I was truly alone now. My mother wasn't a neutral party. She was a prisoner who had fallen in love with her cage. When I got back to my apartment, I called Devin. I needed to work. Work was the only thing that made sense. "I am looking at the foundation payments," I said, my voice thick. "Find anything?" Devin asked. "I think so," I said. I opened the spreadsheet I had been building. "There is a recurring payment, every month for the last 4 years, $5,000. It is listed as strategic consulting fees. Who is the vendor?" "North Harbor Solutions." I read. I checked the address. "Devon, it is a strip mall in Delaware, Suite 404. And I ran a Google Street View. I said, "Suite 404 is a mailboxes, etc." There was a silence on the line. Then I heard Devon typing. $5,000 a month, he muttered. "That is $60,000 a year. Not enough to be a salary for a real consultant. Too regular to be project work. It stops and starts." I said, "Look at 2021. It stopped in February and started again in May." "What happened in February 2021? Devon asked. I closed my eyes, searching my memory. February 2021. "Dad fired the VP of Logistics." I said, "A guy named Miller." It was a whole scene. Dad accused him of skimming off the top, and then the payments to North Harbor Solutions stopped? "Yes." "And when did they start again?" "May." "Who was hired in May?" Devon asked. "No one," I said. "But, wait. May was when the threatened lawsuit from the logistics union was suddenly dropped." Devon let out a low whistle. "Okay," he said. "Here's the theory. North Harbor Solutions isn't a consultant, it is a pass-through. The money goes to the mail drop, gets picked up or forwarded, and lands in someone's pocket. It looks like a retainer for a problem solver, or a payoff. We need to know who owns North Harbor Solutions." I said, "I am working on it." Devon said, "But Anna, this is good. This is a control point. Someone is authorizing these checks to a fake address. That is fraud." I hung up. I felt a grim satisfaction. My mother's betrayal still stung. A raw wound in my chest. But the data was a balm. The data didn't lie. The data didn't try to manipulate you. 2 days later, the courier arrived. He was a professional, dressed in a dark uniform, driving an unmarked sedan. He handed me a thick, heavy envelope, personal and confidential, to be opened by addressee only. I took it into my kitchen. I used a steak knife to slit the seal. Inside was a leather-bound folder and a check. I stared at the check. It was drawn on a private bank. The number was staggered, $5 million and 0 cents. My breath caught in my throat. $5 million. It was enough to buy a house, a real house. It was enough to start my own firm. It was enough to never worry about the rent or the grocery bill or the humiliation of a declined credit card ever again. I touched the paper. It was cool and smooth. Then I opened the folder. Settlement agreement and general release. I read the first page. It was a buyout, a complete, total severance. If I cashed the check, I agreed to waive any future claim to the estate. I agreed to be removed from the will. I agreed that this $5 million was the entirety of my inheritance. I turned the page. Non-disparagement and confidentiality. The recipient agrees to never, in perpetuity, make any negative, critical, or disparaging remarks regarding Graham Simmons, Simmons Ridge Capital, or any associated entities, in public or private. Standard. I turned the page again. Cooperation with regulators. The recipient agrees that, unless compelled by a court order of highest jurisdiction, she shall not voluntarily cooperate with, provide documents to, or assist any regulatory body, government agency, or investigative entity regarding the internal operations of the company. I stopped. I picked up my phone and took a picture of the clause. I sent it to Mara. 1 minute later, she called, "Do not touch that check." Mara said, "I am looking at it." "Mara, it is $5 million. It is a trap," she said. "Look at the date." I looked at the cover letter. "This offer is valid for 48 hours from the time of delivery. They are putting a gun to your head." Mara said, "They want you to panic and take the cash. But that clause? The one about regulators? That is the tell. Why? Because you cannot contract away your right to report a crime." Mara said, "That clause is unenforceable in many courts. But the fact that they put it in there means they are terrified you are going to talk to someone specific. They are trying to buy your silence before the government knocks on the door." I looked at the check again. $5 million. It was freedom, but it was also a collar. If I took it, I would have to be silent forever. I would have to watch my father continue to bully people, continue to hide money, continue to use my mother as a pawn, and I would have to say nothing. I would be rich, and I would be owned. I picked up the check. I thought about my empty bank account. I thought about the ramen. Then I thought about my mother's shaking hands. I put the check back in the folder. "I am not taking it." I said to Mara, "Good." She said, "Now, lock everything down. If they offered you $5 million, it means they think you are worth $10 million of damage. They are going to escalate." I spent the next 24 hours building a fortress. I went to a different bank, a national chain with no ties to the regional elites my father played golf with. I opened a new account with the $80 I had left in cash. I went to an electronics store and bought a burner phone and a new laptop with cash I got from selling my watch at a pawn shop. I transferred all my files to an encrypted drive. I changed every password I had. I set up two-factor authentication on everything. I was rebuilding myself. I wasn't Anna Simmons, the heiress anymore. I was Anna Simmons, the witness. The deadline for the settlement passed. I didn't call. I didn't email. I just let the silence speak for me. The next day, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from a profile with no photo. The name was JRT. I used to work for the family. "We need to talk." "Not here." I looked at the profile. JRT. James Turner? No. He was still there. Jonathan Tate. Jonathan Tate. He was the former VP of Compliance. He had been fired 6 months ago. The official story was, "Performance issues." I replied, "Where?" "The diner on Route 9. Tonight, 9 p.m. Come alone." I told Mara. She didn't like it. "It could be a setup." She said, "I have to go." I said, "He was compliance. He knows where the bodies are." I drove to the diner in the rain. I parked in the back. I wore a baseball cap and no makeup. Jonathan Tate was sitting in a booth in the back corner. He looked terrible. He had gained weight, and his skin was sallow. He was nursing a glass of water. "Anna," he said when I slid into the booth. I wasn't sure you would come. I am here. Jonathan, why did you reach out? He looked around the empty diner. I heard you were asking questions. I heard about the records request. I nodded. You are wasting your time with the records, he said. They scrub the digital archives, but they cannot scrub the memory of the people they fired. What do you know? I asked. I know why your father is terrified of an audit, he said. He leaned in close. His breath smelled of mints and cigarettes. It is not the tax evasion. Anna, everyone does that. It is the payroll. The payroll? There is a secondary payroll, Jonathan whispered. It is run through the foundation, through those shell companies you probably found. North Harbor Solutions? I asked. He flinched. You found that? Yes, that is just one of them, he said. Anna, listen to me. He is not just paying consultants. He is paying witnesses. Witnesses to what? To everything, Jonathan said. Accidents at the plants, harassment claims, environmental dumps. Whenever something bad happens, a consultant gets hired, and the problem goes away. He took a sip of water, but there is one specific audit he is scared of. The State Attorney General's Charity Division. Why? Because if they audit the foundation, they will see that the money isn't going to orphans or clean water. It is going to people who were paid to stay quiet about personal matters. Personal matters? I asked. Jonathan looked me in the eye. The fear in his face was real. Anna, there are women. There are families of workers who got hurt. There are local politicians, if that ledger ever comes out. Graham Simmons isn't just broke. He is in prison, and the whole town of Ridgehaven goes down with him. I sat back. The weight of it crushed me. I had thought this was about greed. I had thought it was about control, but it was darker. My father had built an empire on silence. He had monetized fear. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because he stopped paying me, Jonathan said bitterly. And because I saw what he did to you. He disowned his own flesh and blood to protect the lie. That scared me more than anything else. He slid a napkin across the table. Check this name, he said. Elena Rosales. Who is she? Just check it, and check the payments from the Archer Trust. He stood up and threw a $10 bill on the table. Good luck. Anna, watch your back. He walked out. I sat there for a long time. The waitress came over and asked if I wanted coffee. I shook my head. I drove home in the dark. The rain lashed against the windshield. For weeks. I had been asking myself the question every child asks when their parent rejects them. Why doesn't he love me? I had scrutinized my own behavior, my own choices, wondering where I had failed him. But as the wipers slapped back and forth, the question changed. The grief in my chest hardened into something cold and sharp. It wasn't about me. It had never been about me. I was just collateral damage in a much larger war he was waging against the truth. I thought about the name, Elena Rosales. I thought about the personal matters. I stopped asking, why doesn't he love me? And I started asking, who has he hurt to keep this image? The question made me nauseous. It made my stomach turn. But it also did something else. It made me unstoppable. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was the reckoning. I pulled into my parking spot. I didn't go inside immediately. I sat in the car, listening to the rain, and I felt the fear evaporate. You can't be afraid of a monster when you realize the monster is just a scared man hiding behind a checkbook. I took out my phone and texted Devin. I have a name. Elena Rosales. Run it. I walked up the stairs to my apartment. I didn't look back. The strategy session didn't look like a war council. It looked like 3 people eating takeout Thai food in a cluttered office at 9 o'clock at night. Mara pushed a container of pad Thai aside and spread a fresh timeline across her desk. We are not going to the press, Mara said. She tapped the table with her pen. That is the mistake everyone makes. They think the court of public opinion matters. It doesn't. Your father can buy public opinion. He can buy ads. He can buy editorials. He can buy silence. So what do? I asked. We go to the people he cannot buy. Mara said, the bureaucrats. The people who stare at spreadsheets all day and get angry when the math doesn't add up. Devin nodded, swallowing a mouthful of curry. We trigger a compliance cascade, he said. We don't file a lawsuit claiming he is a bad father. We file a narrow, boring administrative complaint about the foundation's expense ratios. It has to be precise. Mara added, we are not accusing him of fraud. We are simply asking the State Charities Bureau to review a series of anomalies regarding the North Harbor Solutions payments. We frame it as a concern for proper governance. We are the good citizens helping the state do its job. And the best part? Devin grinned. Once the state opens a file, even a preliminary one, the family legally has to preserve everything. If they shred a single receipt after the timestamp on that complaint, it is a felony. It felt sterile. It felt too quiet for the amount of rage I was carrying. But I trusted them. I trusted the math. I signed the complaint the next morning. It wasn't a dramatic document. It was 4 pages of dry procedural language. Request for review regarding Simmons Family Foundation disbursements. Fiscal years 2018 through 2021. I mailed it, and then we waited. The response didn't come from the state. It came from the family. And it wasn't a letter. It was a silence where money used to be. I had a small trust fund left to me by my grandmother, Eleanor's mother. It wasn't part of the Simmons fortune. It was separate, a modest account she had set up for me when I was born. It held about $40,000, money she had saved from her own teacher's pension. It was sentimental money. It was the fund I used to buy Christmas presents and pay for my annual trip to her grave in Vermont. I logged in on a Tuesday morning to check the balance, planning to use some of it to pay Mara's retainer. Account frozen. Status, under administrative review. I stared at the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. I called the bank immediately. I am sorry. Ms. Simmons? The customer service representative said, her voice robotic. We received a notification from the trustee regarding a potential dispute over the original terms of the grantor's intent. The assets are frozen pending legal resolution. The trustee was my father. He had never touched that account. He had always called it pocket change. He wasn't freezing it because he needed the money. He was freezing it to tell me that nothing was safe. He was reaching beyond the grave to take away the one thing his money hadn't touched. He was telling me, even her memory isn't yours. I hung up the phone and sat on the floor of my rental apartment. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just felt a cold, hard stone form in the center of my chest. He knew that money meant independence. He knew it was the only emotional tether I had left to a family member who had actually loved me. 2 hours later, the banging started on my front door. It was aggressive, rhythmic pounding. I looked through the peephole. It was Caleb. I opened the door, leaving the chain on. Caleb stood in the hallway, his face flushed, his tie loosened. He looked like he had run all the way from Ridgehaven. Open the door. Anna, he said. I unhooked the chain and stepped back. He stormed in, bringing the smell of rain and expensive cologne into my drab living room. He looked around at the mismatched furniture, the boxes, the map on the wall, and his lip curled. Is this what you want? He asked, gesturing wildly. Living like a refugee? Trying to destroy the family? I am not trying to destroy the family. Caleb, I said calmly, you filed a complaint with the state, he shouted. Do you have any idea what you have done? Dad is climbing the walls. The lawyers are talking about a full audit. You are going to tank the stock price. I didn't file a lawsuit. I asked for a review. If everything is clean, there is nothing to worry about. There is always something to worry about, Caleb yelled. That is how business works. You know that. You are jeopardizing everything. The employees, the charities, the legacy. And for what? Because you didn't get your way? I looked at my brother. He was vibrating with anxiety. He wasn't angry because I was wrong. He was angry because he was terrified. He was the steward now. If the ship went down, he was the one standing at the wheel. Caleb, I said softly, don't use that voice, he snapped. Don't try to manage me. I am asking you a question. I said, did you read the amendment you signed? He froze. His mouth opened. then closed. "Of course I read it," he said, but his eyes shifted to the left. "Did you read the indemnity clause?" I asked. "Did you look up the entity names? Do you know who owns North Harbor Solutions?" He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. "Caleb," I said, stepping closer, "if you didn't read it, and you signed it, you are liable. If they find fraud, Dad has a liability shield. Do you?" He went pale. The bluster drained out of him, leaving him looking very young and very lost. Dad would never... He started, but the sentence died in the air. "Dad would never what?" I asked. "Sacrifice you to save himself?" Caleb stared at me. He looked at the cease and desist order taped to my wall. He looked at the stack of files on my table. He realized, in that moment, that I wasn't just a bitter sister. I was the only person in the room who knew what was actually happening. "He is receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award next week," Caleb whispered. "In Westbridge City, I know. If you ruin this for him," Caleb said. But there was no threat in his voice anymore, only a plea. "Go home." "Caleb," I said, and read the documents. He turned and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He closed it softly, like he was leaving a funeral. The public counteroffensive began the next day. I picked up a copy of the Bay Ridge Ledger at the gas station. My father's face was on the cover, shot in black and white, looking noble and weathered. The headline read, "The Quiet Architect, Graham Simmons, on Faith, Resilience, and Building a Future." I read the article in my car. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It described him as a reluctant titan who cared more about his community than his profits. It mentioned his deep heartbreak over a family estrangement, framing him as the long-suffering patriarch dealing with a troubled child. "It is a heavy cross to bear when those we love lose their way." The article quoted him as saying, "But we pray for them, and we keep the door open." I crushed the paper in my hand. It was brilliant. He was inoculating the public. If I spoke out now, I would look like the prodigal daughter attacking a saint. In the same issue, a sidebar announced the gala. The Westbridge City Business Council would be honoring Graham Simmons with the Pillar of Industry Award at a black tie event on Saturday. It was the coronation of his career. My phone buzzed. It was Devin. I found it. The text read, I called him immediately. "Found what?" "The property in Maine," Devin said. "The one owned by Silverpine Management. What is it?" "I pulled the permit records from the town hall," Devin said. "It is zoned for light industrial. But 2 years ago, they filed a permit for climate-controlled archival storage." "Storage?" I whispered. "And Anna?" Devin said. "The contractor listed on the permit? It is a subsidiary of the same construction firm that built the family office in Ridgehaven. It fit. Mrs. Halloway had said they were scrubbing the files in the basement. They weren't just shredding them, they were moving the most dangerous ones, the ones they couldn't bring themselves to destroy because they were leverage, to a place no one would look." "It is a vault," I said. "It looks like it," Devin agreed. "And it is 300 miles away from the auditors." I felt a surge of adrenaline, followed immediately by a wave of nausea. I had the location. I had the paper trail. I could hand this to the Attorney General tomorrow. I could tell them to get a warrant for a warehouse in Silverpine Harbor. But I hesitated. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the map. If I did this, if I really pulled the thread, the whole sweater would unravel. It wouldn't just be my father. It would be the employees at the headquarters. It would be the receptionists, the drivers, the janitors. It would be the legitimate charities that relied on the foundation's funding, the Clean Water Initiative, the Scholarship Fund. If I exposed the fraud, the assets would be frozen. The company might collapse. Hundreds of innocent people would lose their jobs. Was I doing this for justice? Or was I doing this to hurt him? I called Mara. "I feel like I'm holding a grenade," I said. "You are," Mara replied. "If I throw it, innocent people get hurt," I said. Mara was silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice low and serious. "Anna, you are not the one holding the grenade. Your father is. He pulled the pin 20 years ago when he started cooking the books and paying off witnesses. He has been holding it ever since, daring anyone to make him drop it. But if you push him, he drops it, Mara said. But don't confuse accountability with destruction. You didn't build the bomb. You are just the one pointing out that it is in the room. But the employees are already in danger. Anna, working for a fraud is not job security. It is a ticking clock. She was right. I knew she was right, but the guilt sat heavy in my stomach. I had to be precise. I couldn't just blow it all up. I had to find a way to cut the head off the snake without burning down the forest. I decided to test the waters. I needed to know how scared they really were. I drafted a letter to Thomas Reed, the family attorney. It wasn't a legal pleading. It was a simple inquiry. Dear Mr. Reed, regarding the documents presented for signature on October 24th, please confirm in writing whether any amendments were made to the entity schedules or the indemnity clauses after I left the room and before they were presented to other beneficiaries. I am asking because my recollection of the entity, Silver Pine Management, suggests a discrepancy with the current public filings. I sent it via email. The reply came in 12 minutes. Ms. Simmons, your inquiry is noted. We strongly advise you to focus on your own well-being rather than vexatious queries regarding business matters you are no longer privy to. We are in possession of certain medical and personal records from your time at the Northline Wellness Retreat in 2019. We would hate for these private matters to become part of the public discourse regarding your current capacity. I stared at the screen. My hands started to shake. The Wellness Retreat was a weekend workshop on burnout I had attended 3 years ago. I had seen a therapist there for anxiety. I had talked about the pressure of being a Simmons. They had my records. They were threatening to leak my therapy notes. They were going to paint me as mentally incompetent. The anxiety spiked, a hot electric jolt running down my arms. I felt the room closing in. I couldn't breathe. They were watching everything. They knew my weak points. They were going to humiliate me. I closed the laptop. I needed help. Not legal help. I needed an anchor. I found a therapist in Hawthorne Falls, Dr. Aris. She worked out of a small office above a bakery. She was young, sharp, and had no idea who my father was. I sat on her couch and told her everything, not the legal strategy, but the feeling of being erased, the feeling of being gaslit by an entire institution. I am scared, I told her. I am scared that they are right. Maybe I am the crazy one. Maybe I am just a vindictive daughter trying to ruin a great man. Doctor, Aris looked at me. Anna, she said, is the bank account frozen? Yes. Did they threaten to release your medical records? Yes. Is your name on a lease for an apartment you pay for? Yes. Then you are not crazy, she said. You are in a high-conflict negotiation with a narcissist who has unlimited resources. Your anxiety is not a symptom of illness. It is a symptom of reality. That was the sentence that saved me. It is a symptom of reality. I left her office feeling grounded for the first time in weeks. I wasn't fighting ghosts. I was fighting men. And men could be beaten. I went back to the apartment. I called Mara and Devin. I am done waiting. I said, what is the move? Devin asked. The gala. I said. Mara hesitated. Anna, if you cause a scene at the gala, you play right into their hands. You become the unstable daughter crashing the party. I am not going to crash it. I said, I am going to attend. I am still a shareholder. I have a right to be there. And then what? Mara asked. I am going to give him a gift. I said, I outlined the plan. It wouldn't be a microphone grab. It wouldn't be a drink thrown in a face. It would be something quieter and deadlier. We needed 2 things. First, we needed the official notification of the state review. Devin said he could get a preliminary confirmation letter from the oversight office, not a subpoena, just a notice that a file had been opened. That was the public part. Second, I needed the private part. I went to the closet and pulled out a small metal lockbox. It was the only thing I had taken from my condo before the locks were changed, other than my clothes. Inside was my grandmother's legacy, not the money, the other legacy. My grandmother, Eleanor's mother, had despised Graham. She saw through him when everyone else was dazzled by his first million. Before she died, she had written a letter. She had sealed it and told me to open it only if I ever felt lost. I had opened it the night I was evicted. I read it again now. The handwriting was spiderweb thin but pressed hard into the paper. Dearest Anna, if you are reading this, he has likely shown you his teeth. Graham is a man who thinks he can build a castle on quicksand if the walls are thick enough. But you need to know the start of it. It wasn't genius. It was theft. He didn't start the company with a loan. He started it with your mother's inheritance, which he forged her signature to access. I have the original transfer slip. I kept it. He thinks it is destroyed. It is in the safety deposit box at First National. The key is taped to the back of the photo of us in the silver frame. I had the key. I had retrieved the contents of the box weeks ago. Inside was the proof, not of the modern crimes, the bribes and the shell companies, but of the original sin, the betrayal that started it all. My father's entire mythology was built on the story of the self-made man. He told it at every dinner party. He told it in every interview. I started with nothing but a dream and a desk. It was a lie. He had started by stealing from his wife. He had started by betraying the woman sitting next to him at every gala. This was the private wound. I will deliver 2 envelopes. I told Mara, one for the board and one for him. And the board? Mara asked. What do they get? They get the map. I said, they get the entity structure Devon built. They get the notification that the state is looking. And they get a choice. A choice? They can go down with him, or they can step away. I'm going to force them to see what they are protecting. It is risky. Mara said, if he sees you, he might have security remove you before you get close. He won't. I said, why not? Because the press will be there, I said. And he is winning an award for being a family man. He can't drag his daughter out by her hair in front of the cameras. I hung up. I looked at the invitation to the gala. I had stolen it from Caleb's jacket pocket when he was yelling at me. The Westbridge City Business Council cordially invites you. I wasn't going to wear a gown. I wasn't going to wear the family diamonds. I was going to wear a simple black suit, armor. I walked over to the mirror. I looked tired. My eyes were dark, and my cheekbones were sharper than they used to be. But I didn't look crazy. I looked like someone who had survived a fire and come back to name the arsonist. I touched the glass. Happy anniversary. Dad, I whispered. I packed the envelopes. 1 thick packet for the chairman of the board, 1 thick packet for the head of the audit committee, and 1 thin cream-colored envelope for Graham Simmons. I was ready. The fear was still there, buzzing in the background like a refrigerator. But the clarity was louder. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going there to scream. I was going there to whisper the one thing he couldn't bear to hear. I know. I turned off the lights in the apartment. The map on the wall was illuminated by the street lamp outside. The lines of red ink connecting the shell companies looked like veins. I had found the heart of the beast. Now, I just had to drive the stake in. The Westbridge City Grand Hotel was a relic of the Gilded Age, a massive structure of limestone and velvet that smelled of old money and floor wax. The gala was held in the ballroom, a cavernous space under a ceiling painted with cherubs that had looked down on a century of deals made over champagne. I walked in through the side entrance. I wasn't wearing a gown. I wore a black tuxedo suit, tailored sharp enough to cut, and simple pearl earrings. I didn't check a coat. I didn't take a glass of sparkling wine from the passing trays. I wasn't here to celebrate. I was here to deliver a process server's nightmare wrapped in a polite envelope. The room was a sea of black ties and jewel-toned silk. 500 of the state's most powerful people were milling about, their laughter creating a low, expensive roar. I scanned the room, not looking for my father, but for a man named Robert Himes. Mara had done the research. Himes was the general counsel for the Westbridge Business Council, the organization hosting the event. He was a stickler for procedure, a man who terrified his own board because he refused to ignore liability. I found him near the orchestra pit, adjusting his glasses. He looked bored. "Mr. Himes," I said, stepping into his line of sight. He blinked, surprised by my directness. "Do I know you?" I am Anna Simmons. I said, I am a shareholder of Simmons Ridge Capital. His expression tightened. He knew the name. Everyone knew the name. He likely knew the rumors, too, that I was unstable, that I was out. I am not here to cause a scene. Mr. Himes, I said, keeping my voice low and steady, but I am in possession of information regarding the compliance status of the Primary Honorees Charitable Foundation. Under the bylaws of your organization, you are required to log any formal notice regarding the misuse of philanthropic funds associated with your awards. I held out a thick, sealed manila envelope. This is a copy of a request for review currently filed with the State Charities Bureau, along with a schedule of the entities in question. Himes looked at the envelope like it was radioactive. Ms. Simmons, this is a gala. This is hardly the time. Notification is effective upon delivery. I said, if you refuse to accept it, I will have to note that in the supplementary filing, it concerns governance and charitable funds. You can verify the receipt numbers inside. He hesitated. He looked around the room. He saw the potential for a scene if he argued, and the potential for liability if he ignored me. He was a lawyer. He chose the path of least resistance. He took the envelope. I will review this in the morning. He said stiffly, that is all I ask. I replied. I turned to walk away, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I had just planted a landmine in the center of my father's coronation. Himes couldn't bury it. He had a fiduciary duty to the council. If he gave an award to a man under state review for charity fraud, the council itself could be sued. I made it halfway to the exit before the crowd parted. Graham Simmons was walking toward me. He looked magnificent. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, his silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. He was smiling, that wide, benevolent smile that had charmed investors for 40 years. He stopped 2 feet from me, close enough to be intimate, far enough to look casual. Anna, he said. His voice was warm, loud enough for the nearby circle of donors to hear. I didn't know you were coming. It is wonderful to see you. He reached out to touch my shoulder. I didn't flinch, but I didn't lean into it. I stood perfectly still. Hello. Dad, I said. He leaned in, his smile staying fixed. But his eyes went dead. They were 2 chips of flint. What are you doing? He whispered, his lips barely moving. Get out. I am just leaving. I said, you are embarrassing yourself. He hissed. You look like a waiter in that suit. Go home. We will discuss your allowance next week. Let's not do this here, he added, his voice rising slightly to a pitch of fake joviality. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had evicted me, smeared my name, and frozen my dead grandmother's trust. You already did, I said softly. I walked past him. I didn't look back. I felt his eyes boring into my spine, burning a hole through the wool of my jacket. I didn't leave the hotel. I went to the mezzanine balcony, a shadowed area overlooking the ballroom. I stood behind a heavy velvet curtain and watched. The gala proceeded. The orchestra played a waltz. Waiters cleared the salad plates, but the poison was already in the bloodstream. I saw Robert Himes whispering to the president of the council. I saw the president's face go pale. He looked across the room at my father. Then, both men slipped out a side door, phones in hand. 10 minutes later, 2 members of the Simmons Ridge board, men who had been at the dinner where I was disowned, checked their phones. One of them stood up abruptly, leaving his wife at the table, and walked out. The whispers started. It was subtle at first, just heads leaning together, glances thrown toward the head table. My father sat there, laughing at a joke, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. He sensed the shift. He was an apex predator. He knew when the wind changed. Then came the speech. The president of the council returned. He looked shaken. He walked to the podium and gave a truncated, hurried introduction. He didn't use the flowery script that had been printed in the program. He just announced the award. My father walked to the stage. The applause was polite, but it wasn't the thunderous ovation he was used to. He began to speak. He talked about resilience. He talked about the sacred duty of stewardship. "We build not for ourselves," he said, his voice booming through the speakers, "but for the generations who follow. We build on a foundation of trust." And then, it happened. "Trust is the only currency that matters," he said. His voice cracked. It was microscopic, a tiny wobble on the word matters. To anyone else, it might have sounded like a dry throat, but I knew him. I knew his cadence. I knew his breath control. He faltered. He looked down at his notes, confusing his place. For 1 second, one singular, terrifying second, he looked old. He looked afraid. He recovered instantly, finishing the speech with a flourish. But the damage was done. The invincible armor had a dent. I turned and walked away. I didn't need to see the rest. The room knew. The doubt had entered the building. I walked to the parking garage. The concrete structure was cold and echoed with the sound of distant traffic. I found my car, a used sedan I had bought 2 weeks ago. As I unlocked the door, a black SUV idled past me. It moved slowly, the windows tinted pitch black. It stopped 3 spots down. No one got out. I froze. My hand gripped the door handle. It was intimidation. It was the same tactic they used on union organizers and whistleblowers. "We are here. We can touch you." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I pulled out my phone. I walked toward the SUV, holding the phone up, recording video. I captured the license plate. I captured the make and model. I walked right up to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass. The SUV peeled away, tires screeching on the concrete, speeding toward the exit. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I had to drop the keys in my lap and breathe for a full minute before I could start the ignition. But I wasn't shaking from fear. I was shaking from adrenaline. The next morning, I walked into the Hawthorne Falls police station. "I want to file a report." I told the desk sergeant. "What kind of report?" he asked. "Harassment." I said, "I want to log a suspicious vehicle that followed me." He sighed. "Ma'am, unless they threatened you, I don't expect you to arrest anyone." I said, sliding a USB drive across the counter. "I just want a time-stamped record. I want a case number." He typed it up. I walked out with a piece of paper. It wasn't a shield, but it was a paper trail. If anything happened to me now, there was a line connecting it to that SUV, and that SUV was registered to a fleet managed by Simmons Ridge Capital. I had checked the plate before I slept. When I got home, Devin called. "It is happening," he said. "What is happening?" "The Charities Bureau. My contact says the letter hit the family office this morning. It is a preliminary inquiry." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they are officially under the microscope," Devin said. "It is not an indictment. It is just a, 'Please explain these discrepancies' letter, but it triggers the preservation protocols. If they shred anything now, they go to jail." "And the gala?" I asked. "Himes must have called the state first thing." Devin said, "He covered his own rear end. He reported the receipt of your governance concern. That validates your complaint. It makes it impossible for them to dismiss you as a crank." I hung up and looked at the wall. The first domino had fallen. Then my brother called. It was late afternoon. The light in my apartment was gray and dying. "Caleb?" I answered. His voice was unrecognizable. It sounded thin, reedy, like a child who had been crying. "Anna," he said, "you were right." "About what?" "I went to the office," he whispered. "I went early. Before Dad got in. I wanted to prove you wrong. I wanted to see the files for myself so I could tell you to go to hell. And I found a box in his private safe," Caleb said. "He gave me the combination years ago. Said it was for emergencies. I don't think he thought I would ever use it." He paused. I could hear him hyperventilating. There were 2 folders. "Anna, one was labeled Caleb, Trust A, and the other?" "The other?" I pressed. "It was labeled the Vance schedule." He said, "Vance?" I asked. "Who is Vance?" "I don't know," Caleb said, his voice rising in panic. But inside? "Anna, inside were transfer documents. Millions of dollars. Set aside for a man named Elias Vance, and there was a note attached to the file." "What did the note say?" It said, "Contingency Steward." The silence on the line was deafening. "Contingency Steward." "Oh, Caleb," I said softly. "He is keeping a backup." Caleb choked out. "He has someone else. If I screw up, or if I don't do what he wants, he has a replacement ready to go. He isn't giving me the company. He is just letting me hold it until he decides if I'm useful. You were never the heir." "Caleb," I said gently, "you were just the next host body. I don't know what to do," he said. I put it back. I was too scared to take it. Just knowing is enough. I said, "Now you have a choice." "I can't leave," he whispered. "I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have your strength. Anna, I'm not you." He hung up. I sat there, feeling a profound pity for him. He was trapped in a golden cage, realizing for the first time that the door was locked from the outside, but the cracks were spreading. 2 hours later, my mother called. She didn't use a burner phone. She called from the landline in the library. She sounded drunk, or maybe just exhausted beyond the point of caring. "He is screaming at the lawyers," she said without preamble. "Hello, Mom? He says you ruined the gala," she said. "He says the board is asking questions. He says you are ungrateful. I didn't ruin anything. Mom, I just handed a letter to a lawyer. Why can't you just stop?" she cried. Her voice broke, a jagged sound. "Why do you have to dig?" "Because I found the entity names." "Mom," I said, "I found Silver Pine. I found North Harbor. And I know you signed the checks for the foundation." "I didn't know," she screamed. It was a shocking sound. My mother never screamed. "I just signed where he told me. He said it was for tax purposes. He said it was to protect the family. To protect him." I corrected. "I was protecting you," she sobbed. "If I didn't sign, he would have made life impossible. You don't know what he is like when the doors are closed. Anna, you don't know the silence, the coldness. I did it to keep the peace. You became his accomplice to keep the peace." I said, "I am his wife." She wailed. "What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be my mother." I said. The line went quiet. All I could hear was her weeping, a ragged, hopeless sound. I realized then that she wasn't just a villain in this story. She was a casualty. She had been gaslit for 40 years, trained to believe that her only value was her compliance. She was both his accomplice and his captive. "I am sorry, Mom," I said, "but I can't stop." I hung up. I felt hollowed out. But the work wasn't done. The next day, the offer came. It didn't come through a lawyer. It came from Graham himself. He requested a meeting at a neutral location, a private hangar at the regional airport. Mara said, "Don't go." Devin said it was a trap. I went anyway. I took a cab. I made the driver wait. My father was standing by a sleek private jet, the wind whipping his coat around his legs. He looked tired. The cracks I had seen at the gala were deeper now. His eyes were rimmed with red. "Anna," he said, "Dad." He didn't yell. He didn't bluster. He gestured to the open door of the hangar. "I am tired of this." "Anna," he said, "I am tired of the lawyers. I am tired of the noise." "Then stop hiding money." I said. He ignored that. "I have a proposal. A final one." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a document. "I am willing to reinstate you," he said. "Full beneficiary status, access to the trusts, and a cash settlement of $50 million. I looked at him. It was everything. It was the kingdom. "And?" I asked. "And you issue a joint statement with me," he said. "You say that the request for review was a result of a misunderstanding regarding the complexity of the philanthropic accounts. You say that after a family audit, you are satisfied that all funds were used appropriately." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "We can end this today. Anna, you can have your life back. You can have the condo. You can have the credit cards. You can be safe." I looked at the document. It was a surrender. If I signed it, the state inquiry would likely fizzle out. Without a complaining witness, they would probably accept a few amended filings and a fine. He would survive. The legend would survive, and I would be rich, but I would be a liar. He wasn't offering me money. He was buying my credibility. He needed me to be the one to exonerate him because I was the one who had accused him. If the crazy daughter suddenly said, "Oops, my mistake," the world would believe it. I looked at the jet. I looked at the man who had terrified me for 33 years, and I realized I didn't want his money. I didn't want his life. I can't do that. "Dad," I said. His face hardened. "Take the money. Anna, don't be a fool. You can't win this. I will bury you in litigation for 20 years. You will be old before you see a dime." "I don't care about the dime." I said. "Then what do you want?" he shouted. "What do you want?" "I want you to admit it." I said. "Admit what?" "That you are a fraud." I said. "That you scared Mom into submission. That you are playing Caleb against a backup heir. That you bought your reputation with hush money." He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You want the truth?" he sneered. "The truth is that I did what was necessary. I built this empire while you were playing with dolls. I made the hard choices, and now you stand there in your cheap suit and judge me? You are nothing without me." I stepped back. The wind was cold, but I felt warm. "I am not nothing." I said. "I am the one person you couldn't buy." I turned to walk away. "If you walk away," he yelled after me, "I will destroy you. I will sue you for defamation. I will leave you with nothing." I stopped. I turned back one last time. You can't take anything from a person who wants nothing. "Dad," I got back into the cab. I told the driver to drive. I watched him in the rearview mirror, a small figure standing on the tarmac, dwarfed by the machines he owned but couldn't control. I went back to the apartment. Mara was waiting. "He offered the world, didn't he?" she asked. "Yes," I said. And I declined. Mara smiled, a genuine, shark-like smile. "Good, because Devon found the rest of the map. We have the proof of the personal matters." I sat down at the table. "We are not going to sue him," I said, "and we are not going to the press." "Then what?" Mara asked. "I am going to give him the second part of the gift," I said. I pulled out the lockbox. I pulled out my grandmother's letter, and I pulled out the timeline Devon had built. The timeline that showed exactly who Elena Rosales was and why she had been paid from the Archer Trust for 20 years. "He thinks this is a legal battle," I said. "He thinks he can settle it with a check or a non-disclosure agreement." I put the documents into a new envelope, a heavy cream-colored one. "I am going to show him that the things he is hiding aren't just crimes," I said. "They are the reasons he is alone." I picked up a pen and wrote the address on the front. Graham Simmons, personal and confidential. This is the end of it. "Mara," I said, "I am not sending this to a judge. I am sending it to the board members, and I am sending it to him." "What is the goal?" Mara asked quietly. "To take away his mirror," I said. "He has spent his whole life looking at a reflection that tells him he is a great man. I am going to smash it." I sealed the envelope. "We finish this tomorrow." The headquarters of Simmons Ridge Capital sat on a hill overlooking the town of Ridgehaven, a monolith of gray stone and tinted glass that looked less like an office and more like a modern feudal castle. The architecture was designed to intimidate. The driveway wound up the slope in a long, deliberate curve, forcing you to look up at the structure, to acknowledge its scale and your own smallness before you even parked your car. I had driven this road 1,000 times as a child, sitting in the back seat of my father's sedan, watching the trees blur by. Today, I sat in the passenger seat of Mara's beat-up Honda, watching the building loom closer. It was raining, a cold, relentless drizzle that turned the Connecticut sky the color of a bruise. "Are you ready?" Mara asked, shifting gears as we approached the security gate. I looked at my hands. They were steady. For months, I had been vibrating with anxiety, a tuning fork struck by my father's rage. But now, at the end of it, there was only a quiet, cold calm. "I am ready," I said. The guard at the gate hesitated. He knew me. I had waved to him for 10 years. But he checked his clipboard twice before raising the barrier. He didn't make eye contact. That was the first sign. The building knew we were coming, and the building was holding its breath. We parked in the visitor lot, far away from the executive spaces. We walked through the rain to the main entrance. I wore the same black suit I had worn to the gala. It felt like a uniform now. The conference room was on the top floor. It was known as the Summit Room, a space reserved for acquisitions and hostile takeovers. The walls were paneled in dark walnut, and the table was a single slab of polished granite that seemed to stretch for miles. When Mara and I walked in, the room went silent. My father was sitting at the head of the table. To his right sat Thomas Reed, the family attorney, looking like a viper in a bespoke suit. To his left was my brother, Caleb, staring fixedly at a water pitcher. Around the table sat the inner circle: Peter Vane, the CFO, the new head of PR, and two senior board members who had been with the company since the 80s. It was framed as a family reunification. It was staged like a tribunal. There were two empty chairs at the far end of the table. Miles away from my father, we were the accused. "Please, sit," Graham said. His voice was calm, resonant, the voice of a man who believed he controlled the gravity in the room. We sat. Mara placed her briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. It was the only sound in the room. "I am glad you came. Anna." Graham continued. He folded his hands. He looked well. The cracks I had seen at the gala were plastered over with a fresh layer of resolve. He had a plan. I could see it in the way he didn't blink. "We are here to listen." "Graham," Mara said sharply. Graham ignored her. He looked only at me. "This has gone on long enough," he said. "The rumors, the erratic behavior, the public scenes. It is hurting the family. It is hurting the employees who depend on us." He slid a document down the granite table. It stopped perfectly in front of me. "I have spent the last 48 hours with counsel, crafting a solution," Graham said. "A way to bring you back into the fold, to protect you from yourself." I looked down at the document. Stipulation of voluntary guardianship and asset management. I read the first paragraph. My stomach turned over, but my face remained impassive. It wasn't a settlement. It was a conservatorship. If I signed this, I would agree that I was suffering from acute stress-induced impairment. I would grant my father legal authority over my finances and my medical decisions for a period of 5 years. For my own well-being. In exchange, I would be reinstated as a beneficiary, given a monthly allowance, and admitted to a private treatment facility of the family's choosing. He was weaponizing the language of mental health to erase me. He didn't want to kill me. He wanted to invalid me. He wanted to make it so that if I ever spoke again, the world would just nod sympathetically and say, "Poor Anna, she is not well." I looked up. Caleb was still staring at the water pitcher, his face pale. He knew. He had probably signed off on it. "This is generous," Thomas Reed said smoothly. "Considering the damage caused to the brand, this is an act of mercy." "Mercy," I repeated. I looked at my father. He offered me a sad, paternal smile. "We just want you to be well." "Anna," he said, "you have been under so much pressure. Let us carry the weight for a while. Sign the paper. Come home." The room waited. They expected the explosion. They expected the crazy daughter to scream, to throw the paper. To prove them right, I didn't scream. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "I am not signing this. Dad," I said softly. Graham's smile tightened. "Then you leave us no choice. We will file for emergency custody. We have the medical records. We have the witness statements." "You have nothing," I said. I placed the phone on the granite table. "I have something," I said. I pressed play. The audio was grainy at first. It was recorded 3 years ago, in the back seat of a town car. I had been sitting next to him, pretending to sleep, while he took a call on speakerphone. It was a legal recording. New York is a one-party consent state, and we had crossed the state line into Manhattan when he took the call. Mara had vetted it 3 times. The voice that filled the boardroom was unmistakable. It was Graham Simmons, but not the polished statesman sitting in front of me. It was the bully. "I don't care what the inspector found." The voice on the recording growled. You tell him that the donation to his district's re-election fund is contingent on that report disappearing. It is not a bribe. It is insurance. We pay the insurance so the people stay cooperative. If he doesn't take it, remind him that we employ half his voters. Squeeze him." There was a pause on the tape, and then a laugh. A cold, dismissive laugh. Everyone has a price. Tom, even the saints. Just find the number. I stopped the recording. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a physical weight, pressing down on our chests. I looked at Peter Vane. His face had gone the color of ash. He recognized the conversation. He knew exactly which inspector and which district my father was talking about. I looked at the head of compliance, a woman named Linda, who had only been with the firm for a year. She stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I need to step out," she said, her voice shaking. "Sit down." "Linda," Graham commanded. His voice was low, dangerous. "No," she said. "I cannot be here for this." She walked out. The door clicked shut, and the sound echoed like a gunshot. Graham didn't explode. He didn't yell. He went incredibly still. He looked at the phone, then at me. "That is out of context," Thomas Reed said quickly, though he was sweating. "That is privileged communication. It is inadmissible. We are not in court." "Thomas," Mara said, leaning back in her chair, "we are in a board meeting, and admissibility is complex when the recording captures the commission of a felony." Graham looked at me. His eyes were dead. "You think a tape scares me?" he whispered. "I will crush you. I will spend every dollar I have to make sure you never work again." "I know," I said. I reached into Mara's briefcase. I pulled out a stack of thick, white envelopes. "That is why I am not doing this alone." I stood up. I walked around the table. The sound of my heels on the carpet was the only noise in the world. I placed an envelope in front of Peter Vane. I placed one in front of the 2 senior board members. I placed one in front of Thomas Reference Reed. "What is this?" Peter Vane whispered. "It is a map," I said. I returned to my seat. "In those envelopes," I said, addressing the room, "you will find a timeline constructed by a forensic accountant. It details the flow of funds from the Simmons Family Foundation to a shell entity called North Harbor Solutions. It cross-references those payments with the dates of major regulatory audits and legal settlements." I looked at the board members. "You will also find the entity structure for Silver Pine Management and the permit records for the archival storage facility in Maine." Caleb made a small, choking sound. "And finally," I continued, my voice steady, "you will find the reference number for the preliminary review opened yesterday by the State Charities Bureau." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. "This is not a lawsuit. This is a notification. As board members, you have a fiduciary duty to investigate credible allegations of fraud. If you ignore this packet, if you walk out of this room and pretend you didn't see it, you are no longer just board members. You are co-conspirators." I looked at Peter Vane. "From this moment, Peter, you cannot unknow this." Peter Vane stared at the envelope. His hands were trembling. He didn't look at Graham. He looked at his own future, dissolving in front of him. Graham stood up. He slammed his hand on the table. "Enough," he roared. "This is a fabrication. It is a vindictive attack by a cut-off child." He looked around the table, his eyes wild. "Don't look at the papers. I order you. Do not open them." But the spell was broken. The fear of Graham Simmons was strong, but the fear of prison was stronger. One of the senior board members, a man named Arthur, who had known me since I was a baby, slowly picked up his letter opener. He slit the envelope. Graham watched him, betrayed. "You are making a mistake." "Arthur," Graham hissed. "I have to look." "Graham," Arthur said quietly, "it is the law." Graham sank back into his chair. He looked smaller. The air was leaving him. I wasn't done. I had one more envelope. This one wasn't for the board. It wasn't for the lawyers. It was for him. I walked to the head of the table. I stood next to my father. He smelled of expensive soap and old fear. I placed the cream-colored envelope in front of him. "What is this?" he rasped. "Another threat?" "No," I said. "It is a letter from grandmother. Graham froze. I found it in her safety deposit box, I said quietly, so only he could hear. The one you thought you had emptied. She talks about the beginning. Dad. She talks about Mom's inheritance, and she talks about the transfer slip you forged. His head snapped up. His eyes were wide, terrified. It wasn't the terror of the law. He thought he could buy his way out of that. It was the terror of being seen. She knew. I whispered. She always knew. She knew you were stealing from the family before you made your first million. And she knew you would eventually turn on us. I tapped the envelope. She wrote this for me. But I think you should read it, because it explains why you are sitting here alone, surrounded by people you have to pay to stay in the room. He stared at the envelope. His hand reached out, shaking, and touched the paper. He didn't open it. He just touched it, as if it were burning hot. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as a titan, but as a thief, a man who had built a cathedral to hide a crime. I stepped back. I am resigning from the board. Effective immediately. I announced to the room, I am relinquishing my claim to the estate. I want nothing. Graham looked up. Confusion warred with the fear in his eyes. You are refusing the money? He asked. All of it. I said, but why? He stammered. That is the only leverage you have. If you take nothing, you have nothing. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. If I take nothing, Dad, you can't call me greedy. You can't say I'm doing this for a payout. You can't frame this as a negotiation. I looked at the board members. I will cooperate with the state review as a private citizen. I have no financial interest in the outcome. I just want the truth. That was the kill shot. I saw it land in Thomas Reed's eyes. He knew he couldn't spin this. A daughter who walks away from $50 million just to expose the truth is the most dangerous witness on earth. She is unimpeachable. I picked up my purse. Come on. Mara, I said, we are done here. We walked to the door. Anna! Graham shouted. It was a desperate, broken sound. I stopped. I turned around. He was standing up, clutching the unopened letter from his dead mother-in-law. He looked like a ruin. What are you going to do? He asked. I am going to live. Dad, I said. For the first time, I walked out. We took the elevator down to the lobby. The silence in the car was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It felt like the silence after a storm, when the air is scrubbed clean. You did good, Mara said softly. I feel light. I said, is that normal? It is when you drop 100 pounds of baggage, she said. The elevator doors opened. The lobby was chaos. Reporters were clustered near the security desk. Cameras raised, microphones jostling. Someone had tipped them off. Maybe it was the compliance officer who walked out. Maybe it was the union. Maybe it was just the inevitable gravity of a collapsing star. They saw me. The flashbulbs popped. Blinding white bursts that turned the gray afternoon into a strobe-lit nightmare. Ms. Simmons, Ms. Simmons, is it true the state is investigating? Ms. Simmons, are you suing your father? Anna, why were you at the headquarters? Mara stepped in front of me, putting up a hand. No comment. Ms. Simmons has no comment. They crowded in. The questions were aggressive, hungry. Did you demand a settlement? Are you trying to take over the company? I stopped. I looked at the camera lens closest to me. I saw my own reflection in the glass, pale, tired, but standing straight. I thought about the guardianship papers upstairs. I thought about the unstable heiress headlines. I thought about the hush money and the silence. I stepped around Mara. Ms. Simmons? A reporter shouted. What is your goal here? The lobby went quiet. They wanted a soundbite. They wanted blood. I looked directly into the camera. I am not trying to take over the company, I said, my voice clear and steady. I have resigned from all positions. I have refused the inheritance. The reporters blinked. This wasn't the script. Then why? The reporter asked. Why blow the whistle? I thought about the workers who lost their jobs to pay for the insurance. I thought about my mother, weeping in the library. I thought about the people who had no $50 million safety net. I hope the truth protects the people who had no power, I said. and then I turned away. Ms. Simmons. Wait. I didn't wait. I walked through the glass doors and into the rain. The air was cold and wet, and it felt magnificent. I walked to Mara's car. Water soaking my hair, ruining the suit, washing away the polish. I got in the passenger seat. Mara started the engine. "Where to?" she asked. I looked back at the building one last time. I saw a figure in the top floor window, a small silhouette against the glass, looking down. My father, the king of Ridgehaven, alone in his castle with a letter he was too afraid to open. "Drive," I said, "anywhere but here." We pulled out onto the road. I watched the headquarters shrink in the side mirror until it was just a gray smudge against the gray sky. My phone buzzed. A notification. State Charities Bureau. Case number 2025-8849. Status: active. I turned the phone off. I didn't know if I would win. I didn't know if the lawyers would find a loophole, or if the board would circle the wagons, or if my father would spend his last dime trying to destroy me. The consequences were still unfolding. The empire was trembling, but it hadn't fallen yet. But as we merged onto the highway, heading toward a future I hadn't planned and couldn't predict, I took a deep breath. I didn't know what happened next, but I knew I was no longer owned, and that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to Anna's story. It has been a journey through the dark corridors of power, family, and the high price of truth. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below letting me know where in the world you are listening from. It is always incredible to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice, betrayal, and redemption, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. And finally, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Anna made the right choice by refusing the money? Or should she have taken the settlement? I read every comment, and I can't wait to hear your perspective. Until next time.